Hello, for those of you who don't know me, my name's Gordon and I'm here today to talk to you quickly about gender. Before I kick off, I'd just like to congratulate you for your choice of career. There is no better job than being a teacher. It's the most rewarding profession. It's a vocation, it's a public service, and it's a life well spent. My mother was a teacher for 45 years, a PE teacher. Loved every single day of her professional life, and when she retired, she missed it every single day. So one of the reasons that she missed it, and one of the reasons it's such a good job, is because it's complex. You know, being a teacher is hard maths. I'm not saying that being a doctor isn't difficult, but if you take out an appendix in the Gulf, it's the same as taking out an appendix in Brisbane. That's not the same for being a teacher. If you teach in the Gulf, that's an entirely different proposition to teaching in Rockhampton, or teaching in Blackhall, or teaching in an elite private school in Brisbane, or teaching at a tougher state school in Brisbane. These are complex issues, and that's why this unit is so important, because it will help you get a framework for some of these complexities. I mean, every day, and gender in particular, every day when you go to school as a teacher, you'll be confronted by an array of different scenarios. Here's just some of them. Problems that you will have to come to terms with, negotiate with, construct a position for your teaching and for your personal teaching philosophy. We're aware of many of these. The fact that schools gender people, that boys are steered into manual arts in a general sense, and girls are still steered into things like home ec. That teaching in primary school has become a more and more gendered, feminized profession. That gender comes in many shapes and forms, and boys may want to wear tutus, or boys and girls may want to take same-sex partners to school formals. These are all issues that teachers, we negotiate the complexities of them. And understanding the difference between sex, gender, how schools gender is an important part of becoming a good teacher. It might help, though, first if we start to get some of our terms straight and understand also how gender fits into other aspects of the things that you'll learn in this unit. And intersectionality is an important one. Last week you looked at issues of class, but it's important to understand that class doesn't sit by itself, as I'm sure you've already figured out. And the same is true with gender. Gender doesn't sit by itself. Every single person listening to this fits in the very middle of that model, that they have a gender, they have an ethnicity, and they have a class. So when we talk about aspects of gender today, I want you to remember that also that is combined with issues of ethnicity and issues of class. We could pick somebody at random who has a particular gender, say Obama. Obama has an ethnicity, African American, and has a gender, masculine. But equally, he has a social class, which is middle class. He went to Harvard. Now, you could take somebody else who has a gender, masculine, and ethnicity, African American, but pick somebody from a working class, and they're an entirely different set of identities, an entirely different way of shaping the self. Snoop Dogg is not the same person as Obama. They fit into those intersectionalities in different ways. So when we talk about gender today, I want you always to remember that that is combined with issues of class and issues of ethnicity. It doesn't sit out there by itself. Now, issues of sex and gender, it's good to get our terms straight. Now, everybody has a sex, and that's a biological categorization. And generally, there's two, male and female. Yes, there are other intersex, there's complex biological arrangements, but generally, we've got that. We've got the dichotomy of male and female. Then we have gender, which are social categorizations, and they are given to us culturally. There are many ways of being masculine. There are many ways of being feminine. And they are not attached, they are not glued to being male and female. There are cultures out there where the men have bouffant haircuts and sit around gossiping, and the women have shaved heads, tattoos, and tell dirty jokes and punch each other. So how we understand masculine and feminine needs to be more flexible than just thinking that masculine is glued to male and feminine is glued to female. There is a body of knowledge which does believe that gender is a function of sex, that somehow the biological categorization of sex shapes masculinity and femininity. At universities now, we widely regard that as rubbish. That sex does not determine gender. At most, it just gives it a faint whisper. Now, fair enough, you can read the Courier Mail or a current affair, and once every 3 weeks they'll go, boys' brains are different to girls' brains. Well, what I want you to do as practice is every time you hear that, I just want you to roll your eyes a little. Because generally speaking, we no longer accept that as fact. Boys' brains and girls' brains, by the time they reach adults, are different. But when they're babies, they're not. But if you treat somebody different, in a different gendered way their entire lives, then their brains will end up different. But are they born different? No. So, how then do we come to think of our genders? And so we've got opposite sexes. We've got male and female. And then out of that, we have somehow constructed that our genders are also opposite. That we have masculine over here and feminine over here. And never the twain shall meet. Well, if you look around your social group with your male and female friends, you'll find that you share 95% of your social characteristics. You know, generosity and kindness and courage and all of those things that make humans, you will share. But somehow we've come to think that our genders are opposite. And all our research, all our learned university research says that is not the case. In fact, common sense tells us that that's not the case. But we tend to essentialise them. And that brings with it difficulties. Because if you step outside gendered expectations of what it is to be a real boy, then you start to meet social problems. Set out the gendered expectation of what it is to be a real girl, then you meet social problems. When in fact, rather than being like this, they overlap each other. And that's part of the lecture today. And the tutorials that you'll have, is understanding how we go about constructing these genders. Because the truth is, you might have been male, but your gender is not given to you by nature. You don't look inside. I don't look inside and see the real masculine Gordon. I spent a lifetime shaping myself as a particular kind of male. Just as my father shaped himself as a particular kind of male. And you are in the process of shaping yourself as a particular kind of masculine male or feminine female, for whatever that means. So what we're going to look at is how schools play a part in this process, but also how this process works. How, if you like, masculine and feminine are masks that we put on. Masks that are given to us culturally and historically. So when we come to gender roles, they're fairly familiar. And we might look back of maybe, 100 years ago and see very severe gender roles, that men did this and women did that. And those gender roles might have blurred somewhat. But we still know that there are masculine expectations of what men do associated with masculinity, and expectations of what women do, what real women do, and what real men do. And we all play out those gender expectations. But the issue here is that gender is something that we construct. It's a mask that we wear, it's a set of roles that we play, it's a set of practices that we go through in order to make ourselves masculine and feminine. Those two genders are constructed in entirely different ways. That thing there didn't actually look inside himself and go, do you know what? I'm a great big monster. He spent a long time shaping himself into that kind of masculine, hegemonically masculine male. Likewise, the repertoire of roles that women can operate tend to be different. Those are two traditional genders, and you have to make those. They do not just appear. It's a set of practices. So when I look at how I gendered my children, directly and indirectly, they are the product of a whole series of processes. The research suggests that we speak to our children differently depending on upon their sex in order to make them in particular kinds of gender. I know that I roughhoused my son and threw him up and down in the air and pushed him around in the garden a lot more than I did my daughter. And I'm a professor of these issues, and I should sort of know better, but this is part of the process of making gender that we often don't even realise is going on. So I did speak more firmly to my son. The research suggested in schools, people do speak more firmly to boys than they do to girls. We put different TV programmes on for them. What we buy them. I called, my son's nickname was Tiger, because he was really small. My daughter's nickname was Pumpkin. And those bring with them gender. There's no such thing as a ferocious pumpkin. There just isn't. So there are expectations about what I thought an appropriate boy would be, and that was Tiger. And there are other ways of being men, equally appropriate, that don't involve being a tiger. But the question is, how do we go about shaping gender? Femininity is a perfect example. How is it that we go about making particular kinds of young women? Now, I did a study a while ago on young women's magazines. How young women, and this is just one mechanism of formation, how young girls learn to be particular kinds of feminine girls. And I looked at a whole series of young women's magazines. Here are some titles of how young girls are taught to manage a first date. Because you can't just know. So in order to shape yourself as an appropriate young girl, here are a series of articles which showed them how to be a young woman. You'll recognise those. You know, everybody, male and female, will have read those magazines. Oh, okay, how do you go about kissing? And you'll get little drawings as to how to do it. And then it's not just about those sorts of issues. It's also about how morally to shape yourself. Because you can't just know. Young women's magazines are part of the process by which you learn to be an appropriate young girl. And you get all sorts of messages about how you ought to shape yourself as a person. You can't just look inside and there it is, an appropriate young woman. You're taught by your friends, by your parents, by young women's magazines, by schools. Now, and it even teaches you how to walk, how to talk, how to hold your body. Here's one of my favourite articles of all time. And it's about, it's about how to look at a boy to make him fancy you. Why don't you work your way through this? Another useful expression, though, is the pathetic appealing look. This is a genuine article, which brings out a boy's protective instinct and has him desperate to get you another drink, help you on with your coat, give you a lift home. Now, here's how you do it. It's best done by opening your eyes wide, dropping your mouth open a little, and looking directly into the eyes of your boy you're talking to while hanging your head slightly. I mean, you actually are taught how to be a feminine girl. And it's not so much that. It's also how to walk. Here's another one. The walk that drives men wild, from Cosmopolitan. Your head up, your shoulders back, you lead with your boobs. You're up. This isn't actually easy to do. Your arms swivel loosely back and forth while your hips swivel from side to side. Your weight's more on your heels. Repeat this mantra to yourself as you walk. Shoulders, hips, heels. So it's shoulders back, head up, boobs. Well, look, I can't do it. I guess women spend a lifetime learning how to do that. But the point is, you learn how to be a woman. You're taught how to be a woman. And there are a variety of different femininities which you can choose from, a vocabulary of ways of being a young woman, out of which you cobble together your gender, your femininity. And it's the same with masculinity. Now, the difference, in some sense, with masculinity is whereas a lot of femininities sit level with each other, one type of masculinity rules the roost. And we call it hegemonic masculinity. And you'll probably recognise the characteristics. That is self-reliance, aggression, domination, lack of emotion. And that type of masculinity, in many ways, dominates the schooling environment. That young men are tough, that young men don't complain, young men don't cry, young men don't show emotion. And we all recognise it. And schools are part of the machinery for its production. And it's no better, historically, or necessarily any worse, than any other kind of masculinity. But unlike femininity, masculinity sits on top. And we all recognise it. So if we look at hegemonic masculinity, that is a hegemonically masculine man. Bruce Willis. He has the characteristics of self-reliance, stoic, tough, courageous. You can't picture Bruce Willis crying. There are other forms of masculinity. But generally speaking, hegemonic masculinity is the dominant form. And schools play a role in producing that, for better and for worse. Okay? Now, when schools come to producing masculinities and femininities, it's done in a variety of ways. So, the fact that we have single-sex schools, the fact we have school mottos, as I said earlier, the fact that we have different gender choices, the fact that boys are taught differently and interacted with differently, the fact that boys and girls get different amounts of teacher time, dress codes, the fact that girls are still expected to wear often clothes which stop them from being physically active, where resourcing goes. As teachers, you'll find you often have different trajectories through the schooling process. All of those are complex gendered issues. So schools just aren't neutral institutions in which you wander in, you get taught some stuff, and you wander out the far side. Schools are giant engines for producing particular kinds of young men and women, for gendered identities. And we really need to know how that happens, because we get many different types of girls and boys into our schools. And it's important that we don't prioritise some genders over others. I think schools can be a very happy place for hegemonically masculine boys. And schools can sometimes be less happy places for boys who don't have those characteristics, who are more musical or more creative, or who express their masculinity in different ways. So as teachers, it's important that we construct democratic environments, that we understand the nuances of how gender's shaped and the roles that we play in the shaping of that gender. And the same with femininities, that we don't just churn out particular kinds of femininities, whether the individuals concerned want that femininity or not. So understanding that schools are gendering machines is part of the process, just as they are machines for producing particular kinds of cultural capital, which we would have discussed last week. And next week, that issues of race and ethnicity are shaped by schools in very particular ways. Good teachers understand, once again, that this is a complex profession. You're not just going in there and getting your curriculum and blurting it to the students and then going, well, that's my job done. You're part of a complex machine of producing particular kinds of citizens. And those citizens are gendered citizens. And those genders have power relations associated with them you have to be aware of, because you're part of the process by which they occur. So, just to conclude, 5 points. First of all, sex does not correlate directly with gender. Gender is not a product of sex. Gender is a product of our history, of our culture, of our family environment, of the friends we choose. Gender is a product of all of those things. And masculinity and femininity do not sit directly on top of male and female. And also, there's not just one. There are many ways of being masculine, many ways of being feminine. Schools have traditionally prioritised particular kinds of femininities and particularly masculinities. And this isn't an exercise in bagging hegemonic masculinity. I spent my lifetime constructing myself as a ridiculously hegemonic male. And that comes with benefits, and it also comes with a cost. And that cost can be to ourselves as a culture sometimes. We have levels of partners murdering women, which is not acceptable, and in some ways linked to particular kinds of masculinity. But equally, it's also the case that suicide rate among men is unacceptably high. Any suicide's unacceptably high, but unacceptably high, because real men, hegemonic men, do not complain, do not ask for help when they need it. Hegemonic males keep their troubles to themselves, and that's counterproductive for all concerned. So this isn't an exercise in bagging masculinity, but as teachers we need to understand how schools produce particular kinds of masculinities and femininities. So we're engendered in many ways, not just the school. As I've said, our parents engender us, the TV programmes that we watch engender, the sports we play engender us. All of those are part of the process. But as teachers, and as good teachers, doing the best job that there is, being a teacher, need to understand how this works. Alrighty. Nice to talk to you.